Hi, welcome to the warehouse at Black Sheep headquarters in Murrieta, California. Today we're going to talk about biker culture, about the context in which we do our ministry. And we're going to talk about the politics of motorcycle ministry and how we as Christians need to adapt and understand what we're getting into. It may come to a great shock to a lot of Christians that when they join a motorcycle ministry, they also join a culture. When any missionary goes to the mission field, he joins that culture to some extent. It was God's sense of humor that when I went to seminary and could not decide what it was that I should focus my seminary studies on, that I ended up going into missiology. And all of my training had to do with learning to be a missionary in a third world country. Ironic that a few years later we would start Black Sheep Harley-Davidsons for Christ, and without really noticing it right away, how much of what I had learned over the last several years applied directly to this ministry. You come out of a Christian context. Most of you are Americans. Most of you are either white or Hispanic. And all of these things are the elements that make up our worldview. They make up the way we see the world around us. You cannot take that worldview and put it on top of the motorcycle ministry and do ministry, because it won't make sense. Think, for an example, the language that we use. Christians tend to use the word share a lot. I'd like to share something with you. That doesn't necessarily communicate other places. Or we don't say, hey, I'm happy, or hey, I had a great time. We say, I was blessed. And you'll see some people roll their eyes and say, what? What does that mean? So often our culture, not our faith, our culture gets in the way. And so we need to be sensitive to that as we look at motorcycle ministry. Let me give you some other examples about worldview. If you take a map almost anywhere in the United States and you put up a world map on the wall, what's right in the middle of that map? The North American continent and the United States. And so we grow up thinking that the United States is right in the middle of the world. But a few years back when I went to Australia, I noticed one day in the guy's office that on his map, Australia was right in the middle, and the United States and the North American continent was off to the side. That was their worldview. When we go into the motorcycle world, there's going to be things that are important to them. There's going to be things that are sacred to them. There are going to be some things to them that they simply understand that we don't, and we need to commit to learning, to becoming smart missionaries. Remember that to understand and to adapt as much as you can is not the same as condoning or necessarily embracing, but we do just need to understand and to be sensitive to the world that's around us. For an example, you've often heard that we need to be careful with our vest. Now, to us as Christians, it's a vest, it's got some patches and a few pins on it. In the motorcycle world, the vest is generally treated with great care. They've worked very hard to get their vest. And if they see us mistreating or disrespecting our vest, that's very offensive to them. When I went to speak in Africa a number of years back, I was told that I would need to buy a suit. And I said, I don't need a suit to preach the gospel. And quite frankly, they said you do in Africa. In Africa, all of the pastors, no matter how poor they are, they have a suit. And so in order to relate, for the sake of the gospel, I went out and I bought a cheap suit and took it to Africa and did what I was called to go in there and do. As a motorcycle missionary, you're going to witness some things that are uncomfortable to you. And that needs to be okay. If it's terribly offensive and vulgar, you can walk away from it. But sometimes it's just things that really aren't a moral issue or that big of a deal. And you need to not make a face or make a comment. You need to just smile and endure it. For an example, you're gonna encounter some loud and obnoxious people. You're gonna encounter some intoxicated people. That's fine. You see them, you talk to them if that's appropriate, or you simply move on. You're probably going to hear some dirty jokes and some vulgar language. You don't have to laugh and smile and condone it, but you don't have to stomp out of the room either. I remember one time in Laughlin, Nevada, Jim Birmingham, one of our vice presidents, and I were walking through the event, and Jim's a guitar player and I'm a guitar player, and we just heard some great music, some great blues being played a few hundred yards away. And so we began to make our way over there, and as we came to the opening of the tent and we walked in the door, we realized that we were at the front of the tent where the stage was, and looked inside, and there was about 300 or 400 people in there. And so we just simply slipped in and sat down in the front row and enjoyed about 20 minutes of just great rock and roll and blues. And then the band took a break, and they said, hey, we want to give away some free t-shirts from the band. How many of you would like a t-shirt? And of course everyone's raising their hand, and they summoned this one young lady to come up, who came running up to the front of the crowd, and they said, okay, we have a t-shirt for you, but the way we do it is you give us your t-shirt and we'll give you one of ours, which meant obviously for a moment or two she was going to be naked in front of 300 or 400 people. And Jim and I looked at each other, and what would you do in that situation? Would you sit through that and watch that? Well, if you're wearing your cut, we would advise that you not, because there's about 300 cell phones behind you that are clicking pictures, and you don't want to have a black sheep picture in that photograph. Would you stomp out and proclaim the name of Christ and holiness as you walked out the door? Really no need to do that. Really no need to put that cultural situation into an ugly context. We simply looked at each other and smiled, and we got up quietly and we just walked out of the tent. That's adapting to the culture around us. You are going to probably come across some blasphemy, some use of God's name and the name of Christ in vain. You're going to see some very offensive t-shirts from time to time. People are going to spout political views that don't agree with you. We're not there to change their culture. We're there to introduce them to the love of Jesus Christ. Let me ask you a question. Do you believe in the Holy Spirit? Do you believe in the second person of the Trinity? Do you believe that He loves these people as much or more than we do? And don't you know that it's His job to speak truth into their lives? Our job is to reflect Christ, not to beat people up with our expectations, with our theology, with our cultural and our worldview concepts. Our job is to live Christ-like lives in front of them, and when appropriate, certainly share the gospel and share our theology and share what we know about God the Father and Christ the Son and the Holy Spirit and the Word of God and so forth and so on. But we need to understand that we have a worldview that is not necessarily their worldview. We have a subculture that is not necessarily like the subculture that we're going into. Now, some of you, as I've said before, are coming out of a club-oriented world. You've been riding your whole life. Perhaps your family members are in one of the major motorcycle clubs, and you understand all of this. What you need to understand is that some of that culture, some of that worldview of the biker world does not translate into Christian discipleship. And you need to know what has a moral value and what has an amoral value. And you need to adapt and follow Christ and follow His word. At the same time, those of us that are coming from being saved as a child and raised throughout our lives in the church, we need to understand that as we come into the motorcycle world, that we need to adapt to them where we can, where it's not a critical or moral issue. And that explains kind of what the struggle is. Black Sheep is so diverse. Like any other Christian church, we're not a church, we are the church, but like any church, we're made up of a lot of different kinds of people. Black Sheep is old and it's young. It's some wealthy people, some people that are struggling to make payments on their Sportster. We have moms and dads, we have singles, we have Hispanic, we have African American, we have Asian, we have white people. We come from different parts of the country, different parts of the world. And all of those things can, if we're not careful, be confusing as we try to minister out of our context into a different context. Let me just say that in your notes, there are several websites that we encourage you to go to and to read them, not because you're going to adapt everything they say, but they're going to talk to you about cultural mores, cultural values of the motorcycle world, and you need to be aware of them. Some of the simplest things. I remember the first time that a small group of Black Sheep encountered a 1% club. It was the Vagos Motorcycle Club. And they were actually quite gracious to us as our members talked to them and asked them questions that they shouldn't have been asking. And I remember one of our ladies actually reached up and touched one of the patches on the vest of a Vago and said, what does that mean? And I knew what that particular patch meant, and it wasn't really appropriate for her to find out. I know she went on to ask this person, "Are you really a bad man?" And just very, very awkward. And we were treated with respect, and we went on our way. But looking back on that, boy, we really were clumsy as we tried to minister in a world that wasn't our own. If you'll read these, if you'll read the notes and stuff that I've included in your mentorship from the different websites, you're going to learn a lot of stuff. You're going to learn about terminology. Language, what certain words mean. You need to understand what those words mean. You're going to learn about the tribal nature of clubs and why a club is so different from a motorcycle ministry. I would hope that we would learn something from the club mentality about the sacredness of being in this ministry. This isn't something that we should be doing lightly. This isn't something that we should do for a year or two and then move on and take on another hobby. This is not a hobby for me. This is not a hobby for most of our members. This is a calling. And I'm reminded of Ephesians chapter 4, I believe it's verse 1, where the Apostle Paul says, live a life worthy of the calling that you've been called to. Live a life worthy of your calling. The biker world gets that. They are sold out. They are blood in, blood out. And we're maybe not that extreme, but boy, we could certainly learn from their commitment. There's certain protocol on in dealing with motorcycle culture that you need to be aware of. You need to, for an example, when you're at a rally and you need to talk to somebody from this particular club, you just don't walk in the middle of their circle and start talking. You find somebody on the outside, you introduce yourself, and you say, could you help introduce me to whoever's in charge? I have some information for them. There's so much to learn, and it's in these websites, and I want to encourage you to go there. I also want to quickly say to you that having said all of this, that we really have very little to do with the motorcycle club world. Not because we don't want to, but because, as I said in our last lesson, that our calling, our primary focus is on Harley Owners Group. But if you're going to go to any motorcycle rally anywhere, you're going to come in contact with motorcycle clubs, and you need to learn some of this basic protocol. One of the most important things that I do need to tell you is that if you're in a different area of the country and you're not sure if our patch has been okayed to be in that area of the country, give our office a call and we can usually instruct you. We have never had in 16 years anybody seriously threatened or roughed up or disrespected or anything for wearing our cut. But if somebody does come to you from the motorcycle world and says, your vest, who gave you permission to wear that here? Or we want you to take that off. The rules in Black Sheep is that we do not ever, ever defend our vest, our cut, our patch with violence. What's the principle there? Jesus said, if they want your coat, give them your shirt too. It's just not that important, and it's not worth what you'd have to go through if that was to happen. When someone comes to you and says, you need to take that off, you need to stand in front of them. You need to look them in the eye. You need to be Christ-like and respectful. Don't try to act like a tough guy. Don't try to demonstrate any attitude, because that's a green light for them to get ugly. You don't want to do that. If they ask you to take off your vest, listen very carefully. You need to take it off. You need to fold it inside out, and then you need to place it carefully in your saddlebag or in your tour pack. Answer the questions that they ask you that you can about their ministry. It's extremely appropriate for you to say, hey, listen, that's probably better for you to talk to our national office about, and give them our number. Give them your card, which should have our website on it. Anything you do not know, just tell them, I don't know the answers to that. And usually when we treat other cultures with respect, even if we make mistakes, they tend to reply with the same sort of respect. Let me encourage you to educate yourself. It's not pretty, but watch some of the episodes of Gangland that talk about different things in the motorcycle world. Look at some websites on the internet. Understand who the predominant clubs are in your area. When in doubt, ask a question. And before you try to put on a patch if you were to move and you're in a new section of the country, before you try to put on your patch in a new and strange area, find out what's going on in that community. Find out from the COC, the Confederation of Clubs, who's in charge and what process you need to go through in order to wear your patch. Give us a call at the national office. Culture is not bad. Culture is culture. And wherever a missionary goes, he needs to understand the culture that he's getting ready to go into. You should be wise as an owl and as harmless as a dove. You need to be prepared for the mission work that you're about to do. And I think everything would go fine from that place forward. Hey, God bless you and protect you in motorcycle ministry.